Cynthia, welcome back to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Aloha. Thanks for having me back.
You wore your purple today, which is so fitting for the podcast. And you match my hoodie, you match the new lighting we got in the studio, the book cover too. So this is going to be great. And this is like a topic I have been wanting to talk about for a while, and it's on female hormones. And I just want to kick off this episode with just a story on how I've viewed the menstrual cycle when I was young to now. But I used to think that PMS was normal, and just experiencing the negative symptoms the week before your period was just something, we just had to deal with as females, and things like painful cramps and bloating and mood swings and fatigue and sleep problems. And I suffered a lot more of these throughout my 20s, not so much in high school, but of course, everything changes as you get older. So I thought it was because I was getting older, and it got to a point in my late 20s where I would have cramps so painful on the first day of the period that I couldn't even get off the couch and felt insanely nauseous. And I didn't realize that I could really tweak nutrition and lifestyle to feel better, and that what I was feeling wasn't normal. So I started to go down the rabbit hole of certain medical doctors like Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Dr. Jamie Seaman, even some of Paul Saladino's stuff. And a lot of them say, well, you need to up protein, decrease the carbs and sugar. And for a while, I was like, I don't know about this, because this is kind of the opposite of what a lot of sports dietitians are telling us. So I ignored these people for a little bit. I was like, oh, they're full of crap. Like, no carbs, no vegetables. What does this mean? So I continued to suffer. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to give this high protein, high fat a try. Like, what do I have to lose? I'm just going to self experiment. I tried it for several months because I usually like to give 6 months to see if something works, and all my symptoms went away. So I wanted to bring you on to dive more into the science of high fat, high protein diets, of course, bioavailable fats and proteins, nutrient dense fats and proteins, and we'll get into that too. But what role do these play in just achieving hormonal balance for our female athletes?
Thank you so much for sharing your story, because it's important that we all share our stories like that, so that other female athletes know that there is an answer, and then there is a way out, and that maybe not necessarily everything that they're taught by mainstream dietitians and nutritionists is right. I don't know where to start. Of course, I'm a metabolic practitioner. So in case anyone's wondering why am I on here talking about this?
And
I'm
a
a
world champion track athlete.
Right. So I'm a metabolic practitioner. So what I do is I evaluate um, athletes and non-athletes as well. My doctor sends me his patients when he can't figure out what's wrong with them. He recognizes that Western medicine is this. If it's this, I prescribe this. He said, if it's a gray area, Cynthia, I send them to you. Sometimes their blood work looks fine, and I still can't figure out what's wrong with it. So, it's great that he's open-minded like that. And it's great that you were open-minded to try that type of eating program, because a lot of people will just take whatever the news is telling them, because the news is a big source of nutrition information, whether people realize it or not. Like if they're watching CNN or Fox News or whatever it is, they're watching MSNBC, all of it, unfortunately, it's going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but it's just the facts. Like all of them are funded by big companies. And these big companies are big food companies and big pharma companies, usually. These are just facts. And so whenever you watch, like if my boys are 9, 10, if they go to grandma and grandpa's house, we don't have cable TV, but they do. They watch commercials. It's all cereal and toys. So the cereal is being pitched to them as a healthy breakfast because it's cheap and profitable, when it's actually setting them up for all kinds of neurotransmitter, thyroid development issues. We'll get into that. But it's just really important that you're sharing your story, because I hear this story a lot as a practitioner. I work with several Olympians in different sports, and it's unfortunate that even the nutritionists at Olympic training centers and at that level are taught by the same programs. And what my mentor Charles taught me was that basically textbooks are 30 years behind the research. 30 years. So that means anything you're learning today on your own with your own clinical trial, and maybe working with other athletes, maybe you're going to help them implement these strategies. It's not going to come out for usually about 30 years in any kind of medical textbooks if this is an option, which is really sad for our humanity, if they even let it come out. Because maybe they're not going to make as much money that way if people are not sick and if people are not eating the grains that they're trying to sell them. So what it sounds a little conspiracy theory-ish, but it's just the way it is. And if you can put yourself out of believing what everybody tells you on the mainstream and just start doing research yourself. I mean, if you don't want to, you don't even have to, your listeners don't even have to believe me today. They can just start researching themselves. And what they'll find as they listen to what I'm talking about with the different science of the proteins and fats and athletic performance is that they'll find the research. They'll find that this is supported in anecdotes and in other athletes' stories and in stories like yours. So they're going to find that, and hopefully they'll give it a try themselves. I was in the same boat as you, where I was thinking that I was in my early 30s, late 20s, thinking that what you do is you drink a glass of wine at night, and in your late 20s, and you usually are bloated, and sometimes you have PMS, and that's just the way it is. Like you don't have any other option. But when I started learning, someone encouraged me to go gluten-free first for 2 weeks and take a probiotic. That was the only changes I made. Well, I could not believe how good I felt after 2 weeks of just doing that. So then I went back to it just to try, right? So you go back to it. I felt terrible. I had all kinds of gastrointestinal distress, and then went back to the gluten-free and felt great again. So little by little, as I learned these things and then studied, of course, under my mentor, I was able to pinpoint strategies that not only increase athletic performance, but also increase longevity and quality of life. Because when it comes down to it, that's what we want. The things that bring us joy continually. We want to be happy in our everyday life without the dip of sadness. So there are some people that have a lifestyle where they're partying or something like this, and they have the constant, up, but then they have the following dip that's deeper. So we want this constant energy and joy in our lives, our everyday lives, without that dip. And that's what I specialize in. I specialize in energy throughout the day. I specialize in continued energy for athletes in their performance, so they're not having those dips and they're not having to refuel with candy and granola bars and things like this that are ultimately going to cause them chronic disease in the long run. So I just recently got another Olympian client last week. She's a two-time Olympian. And our first conversation was, so we're doing this program for your health first. Like, the athletic performance will come. It always does. But we're addressing the health issues first, because that is what's most important to me. And also she's, in her late 20s. She wants to have children. So we want to make sure her hormones are continue to be balanced so that she has the opportunity to have children if she wants to. So this is a little bit about why I do what I do. I agree to come on podcasts like this, but I don't necessarily, and my mission is to help others thrive, but I'm not on a soapbox looking to be, the most popular influencer there is and make all the money and that sort of thing. Like, that's just not why I do what I do. I do it to make a difference in people's lives. And one of the opportunities that I have that we'll dive into is having an impact on young girls' health. So what's happening is that these education systems that are promoting things like balanced eating and carbohydrate consumption. I actually just saw randomly a dietitian came up in Reels. I look for like music sometimes, trending music, and I just flip through Reels to look for trending music. And this dietitian came up, and it was a pediatric dietitian. And she was saying, I let my kids eat candy for breakfast. And so I was like, oh my God, this can't be real, and I'm looking, and it turns out that she's not the only one. Well, the whole rest of her account was just like shocking to me, because what was happening is she was letting her children parent, and children need us as parents because they're too young. Their brains haven't formed yet. Their brains don't form until age 25, really, all of us. Their brains haven't formed yet. They need us with our wisdom and our experience to make decisions for them. And so I've seen all kinds of different parenting as a coach to high school athletes for years. And I can tell you that the parents that are concerned about the quality of their kids' foods have the most balanced kids coming forward. But long story short, candy for breakfast, where is this taught? It's ridiculous. Who's teaching this? Well, it's companies like Kellogg's that are promoting sugar, sugary grains, sugary foods. Um, and I know this because I mentioned in our last podcast, I believe, that one of my Olympic athletes went to a prestigious university where the head of the nutrition department was also on the board for Kellogg's and was pushing Pop Tarts, saying athletes need sugar. So when I see things like athletes need sugar or carbohydrates are the only macros that can create power and speed, I just kind of chuckle to myself because I feel like, oh, okay, well, they're stuck in 30 or 40 years ago. They just don't know. And I kind of feel bad for them because they don't know. And they haven't studied gut bacteria and they haven't studied the impact of protein and fat adaptation because there really isn't that much research out there on it. And no one wants to do the research because the cereal companies are funding the Pop Tarts for athletes. Meanwhile, they're filled with artificial color, artificial flavor, all kinds of things that disrupt the internal chemical processes of our body. So when I coach young female athletes, first of all, the number one thing I recommend to them is make sure you're eating. Okay. There's a trend going on, and I know because my daughter is 18. She's going off to college tonight, actually. She leaves today. And so I know I've seen her peers, I've seen all of the things coming through, the trends and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, there's still a trend towards eating disorders and not eating enough, being the skinny, wafy kind of thing that's promoted. I like to really promote strong female athletes and, of all ages, but the more I can do that, the better. Because why? Well, when you have more lean muscle mass, and I'm not talking about like bodybuilder steroid type, I'm talking about natural lean muscle mass, strength muscle mass. When you have that, your hormones are more balanced because the all the little molecules. I'm going to try to make it simple on the science for your listeners, but all the little molecules in your muscles help your hormone balance. So that's one thing. They have stronger bones. We know that women are at great risk for osteoporosis, and I've seen it earlier and earlier because of the impacts on bones of the lack of nutrient-dense foods. And sugar is definitely not a nutrient-dense food. I don't care what kind of nutritionist you are. You can't tell me that sugar is a nutrient-dense food or something like a Pop-Tart is going to be nutritious for your female athlete. There is, with the point of that one dietitian was that I don't want them to have a psychological issue with candy or sugar. But I can tell you, again, I have 3 children, that the more you educate your kids at an early age that of the methods of sugar consumption and what it does to your body, the more they understand, and they don't have a psychological issue with it. If you're using it as a reward and continuously, then yeah, they're going to see it as a reward. But if you tell them that their reward is having a better, healthy body, and they feel it, and they have more energy, and they're happy, they don't have anxiety or attention disorders or anything like that. Of course, they're getting rewarded with that, with happiness, day-to-day happiness. That's what I want for my children. So I haven't seen any psychological issues with if you're able to explain it. So I think maybe if as a parent of a young female athlete, you can educate yourself on the things that we're talking about today in this podcast, and so that you're able to explain it or just listen to me and, happy to just use my words. and explain it to your kids, that I find that even at a young age, they understand. So, for instance, my 10-year-old goes to school, and they sometimes have the grocery store cupcakes at lunch or recess for somebody's birthday. And his teacher has told me he chooses not to eat them, but he doesn't feel left out. And I have told him, like, if you feel like you're going to be left out, like, you know, have a couple bites if you want. But I'm not saying that food is okay for you. That is good for you. You need sugar. There's a difference between that, if you can see that. I'm not saying, yes, candy is good for you for breakfast. I'm saying, hey, let's start our day to be optimal. So that's where I'm coming from with this. All right. So number one is make sure you're eating. So a lot of girls are not eating enough. I have had a high jumper once who I remember she came to the meet. She was high jumping at 4 p.m. and she had not eaten a thing all day. And I'm going like, what? I don't know. I forgot to eat breakfast. And then I was with my friends during lunch. And then I got on the track bus and it was 4 o'clock. And so luckily I packed snacks. As a coach, I go to Costco every week. I pack snacks that I approve of for my track team. That way, yeah, sometimes they go get the chili and rice plate from the concession, especially with throwers, but at least they are also having foods that I think are going to be good for their performance. So I happened to give her a couple snacks. She had a PR. It was great. But generally, I find that high school athletes are not eating enough. So they have to eat food and prioritize the importance of fueling your body for optimal wellness. Now, what does that look like? Number two is that they are definitely consuming too much sugar. And how do I know this? Because I see the acne all over these girls' faces. And the acne is a hormonal response to the food that you're eating. My mentor said dairy and sugar are the number one causes of acne in teenagers, and teenagers do not have to have acne. They don't. I again witnessed it in my daughter. When she did go on vacation or something and indulged in a lot of ice cream or whatever it was, she got acne, and she realized, okay, here is what happened, and here's the consequence. So I ate the dairy and sugar all week. Now I have acne, and now what mom says was right. It's not just a study; it actually is true. I recommend if females have acne around their mouth, particularly the chin mouth area, this is a big sign of PCOS. PCOS is a major issue amongst our female athletes today. PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. And basically what it means is that it's a metabolic issue that's happening inside their ovaries. Now, I'm trying to break it down really simple so everyone can understand. So what happens is we need insulin. Insulin is a hormone as well. We need it to put away the glucose that we get in our body, usually from carbohydrates. So if you eat a lot of candy, eat a lot of sugar, you get a glucose spike in your blood, which is where people think the power and the speed, etc., are coming from, the quick energy. Yes, it is possible for our body to use that as quick energy. But what happens is we consume, generally as a population, too many carbohydrates. And so when you have nutritionists and dietitians saying, oh yeah, you need 300, 400 grams of carbohydrates, and then they become, because our bodies are very adaptable, they become carbohydrate adapted, and that's what they need to fuel themselves. They need constant replenishment and then constant more carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates. These are sugars that go into their blood. And over time, they get a condition called insulin resistance. And that means that their receptors in their cells are overstimulated and can no longer produce the insulin needed to put the sugar away. It gets stored as body fat, and it also impacts how the oocyte, the little egg cell that we're born with millions of them, how that develops into an egg and produces ovulation. So that's how that works. So basically, you need insulin to mature that egg or that oocyte into an egg. So with conditions like PCOS, girls who then become women become infertile because their eggs are not producing to maturation. It also causes and that is also because this lack of insulin creates an imbalance when they can't ovulate in increasing testosterone. So then they end up with too much testosterone, which is also referred to as an androgen, if you're looking this up. And that creates the acne around the mouth, usually. It's called perioral dermatitis. So that hormone imbalance is going to affect your menstrual cycles. It's going to affect your mood. It's going to affect your fatigue levels, that sort of thing. On the flip side, too much body fat caused by the insulin not working can also hold too much estrogen. Excess estrogen gets stored in the adipose tissue, which is the body fat tissue, and that becomes toxic. So basically, there are a couple different methods with the estrogen overdominance, and I'll talk about that in a second. But again, we're pinpointing it to too much carbohydrates and too much sugar, because what happens if you eat a fat forward, protein forward diet, and I'm going to say protein first because protein is most important in my experience with clients. Fat second. Ketogenic diets are very healing, but eventually you need the protein. So, and also the dairy, maybe cut out the dairy because that's inflammatory and causes the acne. We have to remember that most regular dairy comes from pregnant cows, and it's for their children, for their baby cows, their children. And so that has hormones in it. It actually has a lot of estrogen in it, particularly. So that can cause things like estrogen dominance as well, which can lead to fibroids, another common condition in the uterus, hormone imbalance. And that can be like, heavy periods and that sort of thing. So the protein first and then the fats. And that is because when you start to become protein fat adapted, your liver produces the glucose that you need for your blood. It's called gluconeogenesis. And if you talk to any nutritionist, they'll tell you that is not the fastest way to produce energy. It's not the most optimal way to produce energy. It's not the best way to produce. You absolutely cannot create ATP that way because, it just takes too long to go through that process. And what I'm telling you is that I have seen with my clients and myself, but hey, what do I know? I just ran faster in my 40s than I did, in college as a Division I athlete. But what do I know?
Me too, Cynthia. My speed times have gone through the roof, and I've heard people say with focusing on high protein, high fat, they feel like Superman, and I can definitely attest to that. It's pretty wild, and I'm still very shocked by the whole thing. But your power output is just amazing, and I
Yes.
continue to be surprised by it by the day. And you feel better when you're older than when you were a college athlete, and it's just pretty fascinating.
It is. And I think a lot of that has to do with the college lifestyle, and the eating situation is very inflammatory. So it's twofold with that. You're eating the grains and the simple sugars are very inflammatory to your body. And what I've found as an older athlete is the less inflammation that you have, and you can use supplements, but also just mostly with your food you're eating. The less inflammation you have, the more efficient you are, and the more powerful you are, and the better you feel overall. So this protein fat adaptation is actually giving you a longer sustained energy, because when you use fat for fuel, you get more kilocalories, you get more energy from the fuel. And so if you're able to sustain that, for instance, I work with Olympic heptathlete and decathlete, and they're able to sustain, they go for hours, like 5 hours for over 2 days to do all these events. It's not just one competition or one race or one soccer match. Like, they need that sustained energy. So what they found is that this type of fat protein adaptation, and for some people it can take as little as a couple days, and other people it takes 2 weeks. But you were correct in giving it 6 months. I say 3 months is usually enough to be able to figure out what's going on in your system. 6 months is great.
Do you recommend athletes do this when they're not in the middle of games and competitions, when they have some time off to adapt and experiment with it?
Yes, good point. Off season is always your off season, preseason are always your times to experiment with anything with diet and supplement changes in general. So the reason why is because if you are carbohydrate adapted, and say you're a track athlete or a soccer athlete, and you're getting ready to have a game tomorrow, you don't want to today just consume, a steak and some nuts and, that sort of thing, because you're not adapted. And so your body is looking for that carbohydrate fuel because that's what it's used to utilizing for fuel. So you want to give it some time to adapt to this new process of teaching your liver that it needs to use this stored glycagon to make glucose, if that makes sense. The other thing is that when these nutritionists and dietitians are promoting this high sugar, high carbohydrate type diet, they're really putting the athlete's general health at risk, because we know that everything from sugar consumption increasing cancer cells by feeding the cancer cells. I think an article just came out about 10 days ago or so about ketogenic diets and cancer, and it turned out that it was mostly mouse models, but it turned out that it starved the cancer cells of the sugar and promoted a better outcome. So that was a really interesting article because it just confirmed all the different types of processes that go on with adapting a high fat diet, which I'll talk more about that too. But so they're putting their health at risk because there's also genetic mutations in all of us, and some of them predispose us to things like Alzheimer's. There's a reason why Alzheimer's is called type 3 diabetes. It's because it's directly related to insulin and insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. And so if you have a certain genetic variation, then an ApoE variation, then you are less likely to be able to metabolize glucose. So these nutritionists and dietitians are not taught this. They are just basically setting you up for possible chronic illness. The third thing is I've seen in young athletes is fatty liver disease, fatty tissue on the liver. And you can look at a girl and she looks super fit. She looks skinny, we'll say. She looks like she's not fat. How is she getting this fatty tissue on her liver? She doesn't eat a lot of fat. She eats non-fat, high carbohydrate, just like the nutritionist says. Plenty of plant-based products, maybe even plant-based protein, which, if you know me, I'm going to tell you garbage. So
it's fake.
It's not easily absorbed by the body. It's full of GMOs and pesticides and all kinds of toxins, and it doesn't create the same. It's lacking in leucine, which is the main muscle tissue building amino acid. So it's garbage.
And it lacks carnitine. It's just everything.
Particularly red meat, animal-based protein diet.
Yeah.
So you've got these sugary diseases. So the fatty tissue on the liver, why is that important? It's because the lipids are getting stuck basically in the liver cells, and then the liver can't do its job. So and the liver is important for all kinds of things, but mostly, guess what? It regulates insulin, which you need, as we talked about, to make sure that you're ovulating correctly and your hormones are balanced. For one thing, insulin is involved in many different pathways. So that's a little bit about basically the myths that are out there about high sugar and how you can experiment yourself. And people think, okay, well, maybe this is not long-term though. There's, what about heart disease? Well, for instance, red meat is high in carnitine, which if you look at any of the research, carnitine is excellent for preventing heart disease. If you look at people that have been on a carnivore diet, because it's been popular now for about, maybe 6-7 years, Dr. Sean Baker, who's the author of the carnivore diet,
I love him.
Yeah, he's a really fun personality. He's just he came to visit me, and he's just really even. I don't know how else to explain it, but he's a really cool, even guy. And you can tell that not only does he believe passionately in what he believes in, but he's basically not non-emotional about it, but it's just the way it is kind of thing. He's not attacking anybody personally and that sort of thing. He's just a cool cucumber who's just really interested in helping other people. And I can tell you that because you can hear the truth in his voice, and you can, somebody once told me truth is a frequency, and people recognize that frequency when they hear it and see it. So I just really feel like um, I appreciate the work he's done to help people heal their bodies through an animal protein based diet. And he'll even tell you, like, you don't have to do it forever. I choose to do not eat any carbohydrates, but that everybody's choice is their own if they want to add a little bit here and there and that sort of thing. And and I'm not strictly carnivore myself, but I am on a heavy animal protein based diet, which has made me thrive for in my 40s for sure, and my athletes as well. So yes, so I appreciate that, people like him are out there to set an example and give us some information and break it down. And yeah, so um,
So
what?
yeah, I love Dr. Sean Baker, and it seems like a lot of the doctors in that carnivore ketogenic community, when they talk, they're just super like chill and stoic. And my theory is it's because the fat is so good for the brain and your mood regulation and cutting out that sugar and just being in this very like peaceful, content state. And just beyond like the physical benefits I've noticed from all of this, I think the brain has been the number one, and just that constant energy through the day, not those crazy highs and lows that you get from sugar and simple carbohydrates, but just that constant energy, that constant clarity and sharpness of mind has been the biggest one. And I think we should maybe dive into the conversation on why fats are so important, because I know a lot of our young girls are avoiding fats at all costs. There's this big misconception around fats that they make you fat, they're terrible for your body comp, when actually it's the opposite if you're getting good animal-based fatty acids. So, do you want to get into fats a little bit?
Sure. It does still. Yes, let's talk about that. Let's break down exactly what you said. So you say it's better for your brain. So there's a few reasons why. Um, there's a type of okay. Most people don't talk about it, and the nutritionists and dietitians are definitely not to just keep picking on them. It's not their fault. I'm not mad at them. It's not their fault. They're just not taught the in-depth information. So the type of bacteria that we produce. And if you didn't know, we hold about 3 pounds of microbacteria, microorganisms in our body and on our body. So the type of bacteria that you produce changes with what you eat and the type of exercise you do. So when you do a ketogenic type high fat diet, you actually produce a bacteria called Akkermansia muciniphila, which has been shown to be neuroprotective. So that good cognitive feeling that you get is because of that, but also because it's sparking different neurotransmitters. So if you eat fats like nuts, have choline, and the choline is the precursor to acetylcholine, which helps you have lasting energy throughout the day. When you have sugar for breakfast, it sparks a bunch of serotonin and a bunch of dopamine, like high in the air, kind of like as if you're doing drugs. Some people have heard this, like the same effect on your brain that sugar has is the same as drugs. It's because of this neurotransmitter spike. So what happens is it spikes it way, way, way up, and then you drop way, way, way down. And you need, with drugs, same as sugar, you need more to feel the same type of happiness that you felt the first time. And so I always say it's kind of not anybody's it's not their fault if they want a donut at 10 o'clock in the morning if they ate cereal or oatmeal or something high carb pancakes or waffles or whatever for breakfast. So when you eat something like red meat for breakfast with maybe a handful of nuts, which is the Charles
That's
Cullen
what I eat now for
theory.
breakfast every
Yeah,
single day. Ribeye. I keep the fat on. I tons of fatty meat is what I've thrived off of, and I think you do the same, right? You have steak for breakfast
yeah.
and
I actually
before you sprint.
Yes, I do. I do like the fat in the red meat, but I don't keep the fat on the trim. I take the trim off because I like to control my fats and where the different types of fats that I'm getting.
Yeah.
And also, animals do store toxins in their fats. So I cut off the main fats only if I don't know where that animal is coming from.
Okay.
And Wagyu, I am not a big fan of at all. That all of that marbled fat in there, and I don't know where that cow's coming from. Is it in a toxic environment? All those toxins get stored in that fat. So, thank you to Wagyu. But ribeyes, yeah, usually very good. That a little bit of that fat in there. I consume local Maui cattle company beef that I know where it comes from. So yeah, so say you have that red meat and that uh, nuts and maybe a handful of berries, because berries are very low glycemic index, but are very high in polyphenols, antioxidants. So say meat, nuts, and berries, that was one of Charles's favorite breakfast, or just the meat and nuts breakfast, depending if if you're obese or something like that, you might not even want those berries because of the response. But that red meat has an amino acid called tyrosine that helps you form dopamine. And dopamine, you're not going to get the spike, you're going to get help forming it, which is different. And that is your neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and drive. And the most successful athletes out there are dopamine dominant and acetylcholine dominant. So you really want to spark those neurotransmitters in the morning. There's also a lot of research showing that if you have a protein rich breakfast, animal protein that is, that you're going to be more productive throughout the day, even if you had a super high carbohydrate lunch. They're showing that productivity and energy is lasting throughout the day if you have a high protein breakfast. What is high protein? Well, I'm going to tell you that for my athletes and myself, it's going to be minimum 1 gram of protein per body weight in pounds, but really more than that. I would say go 50 grams beyond that. So for me, I'm 150 pounds. I consume 200 grams of protein a day, and I don't consume more than 50 grams of protein in a sitting because I feel like our bodies are not, and research says our bodies are not able to absorb maybe that much. And it depends on what kind of protein, if it's digestible. So I supplement with protein shakes, whey protein or beef protein shakes twice a day. That's 100 grams of protein, 50 grams each. So 100 grams of protein right there that I don't have to worry about consuming. The rest of it is usually coming from red meat, sometimes from poultry. Poultry is great later at night because it's got the amino acid tryptophan, which you've heard turkey makes you sleepy. It's got tryptophan, same thing. So it's also in chicken. So I tend to let my athletes or give my athletes advice to have the poultry later in the evening to spark those amino acids to wind down, and also carbohydrates. The carbohydrates will help you wind down. So carbohydrates are not the enemy, but it's how many carbs, the quality of carbs, and the carb timing that's important. Do we need 300, 400 grams of carbs? Absolutely not. Do we need to be carbohydrate based to be fast and a sprinter? Well, no. And it's definitely worked for me that I've gotten faster by eliminating the carbohydrate, being dependent on carbohydrate and being carbohydrate dependent, like athlete. What am I trying to say? The carbohydrate adapted athlete. In order to be protein fat adapted, it's made me faster. And there is a limited, but some research on showing that athletes that do this get improved body composition. They lower their body fat and they increase their muscle mass, which makes you a stronger athlete in nearly every sport. Not only that, but we know that, again, our estrogens are stored in our fat tissue. So if you're highly estrogenic or overly estrogenic and having this hormone imbalance with that, losing that adipose fat tissue will help you have more balanced hormones. So
I've seen a
yeah,
I've
that's
seen a lot
important.
of athletes
Right.
starting to openly come out more about being on this type of diet, the high fat, the high protein. And there's one athlete who's, I think he's a track runner at Michigan State. He's an All-American. He was on Dr. Anthony Chafee's podcast talking about his animal meat-based diet. And then there's been a lot of MMA fighters who are power and endurance athletes. There's been cyclists who are more long distance athletes. So, all different types of sports are starting to talk about the benefits of this for improved sport performance. So, I'll link those all below too, so everyone can do their research. And we're not saying, hey, try this tomorrow, but like dive in and just check it out. Why not?
Yeah, Zach Bitter, who has the 100-mile world record, found out that ketogenic type diets are much better for, longer distances. However, I am not, okay, let's talk about this for a minute. I'm not really a big fan of endurance training. And it's not because I'm biased, because I'm a sprinter. But I found that as we age, especially, but even when we're young, our bodies really like to work hard and rest, work hard and rest. So if you think of a soccer game, for instance, you're running and then you're resting, right? You sprint and then you have a little bit of time where you're not sprinting, you're not running the whole, you might be jogging a little bit back and forth, but you're not continuously sprinting the whole entire game, and you have rest periods. So our body likes that rest. What happens with young female athletes is they get put in this position. We all know the female athlete triad, right? So the female athlete triad is when you don't intake enough calories, you overwork as far as the exercise goes, and you end up missing your periods, or you have double periods. So basically, you have an imbalance in your menstrual cycle. So this is the female athlete triad, and their bones are also weaker, they've found. So why is this happening? Well, these endurance type athletes, unfortunately, in the past, have been told that they need to be skinny in order to be fast. If you look at some of my favorite Boston Marathon runners, Nell Rojas, for instance, she's got lots of muscle and bone mass. So I'm glad to see that there are some distance runners coming out of this mantra. Now, the problem with that is that our hypothalamus in our brain controls our hormones and our menstrual cycle. So when you stress your body so much that it thinks it's dying and it needs to survive, it's not going to want to reproduce. So think about if you were a caveman and you're being chased by a tiger, because that's the level of stress that you're under continuously chased by a tiger. Your body's going to use all of its energy in order to survive and not reproduce, not use that energy to reproduce. So it shuts off the sex hormones. You will no longer make testosterone or estrogen. Same for boys. There are men who do endurance cycling and things like that. Their testosterone tanks. And if you don't believe me, just Google testosterone men endurance training or endurance training hormones women. Any of those, just Google it. You'll find some articles. So it definitely has an effect on the hormone balance because your body thinks it needs to survive and it's under constant stress. So I'm really not a fan of any type of endurance type sport or training for female athletes. Unfortunately, I know many cross-country girl runners who missed their periods for so many years, and they ended up in their 20s and 30s having infertility, major hormone issues, even the fatty tissue because they were taught they should carb up, before running. Again, really unnecessary and a detriment to these females' long-term health. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
I did want to say one more thing about the brain activity and red meat particularly. We have these things around our nerves that coat them called myelin sheaths. And myelin is made of fat. So girls, you need fat, okay? You need it for your body's process. And not only that, when you consume more fat, your body learns to use the fat for fuel. So you'll actually be burning more fat if you eat more fat. This is kind of the basis of ketogenic diets and why they work. But when you're eating red meat as your main protein, you're getting something called B12. And well, you're getting a lot of zinc, iron, all of them.
Iron.
Yeah, that you
Yeah,
need.
iron's a big one.
It is a really, really big one in female athletes. And so the B12 is what you need to make the myelin sheath around your nerves. So when you combine a high protein, red meat based and high fat diet, you're actually defrazzling your nerves. So people say, oh, frazzle nerves, anxiety, but it's anxiety, depression, mood swings. You're actually coating your nerves so that you don't have those things. And so when you show up for your competition, you can be stoic. You can be like cool. You can be excited for your race or your match, but you don't have to have those butterflies so bad that it drains your energy. And if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. You show up to the starting line or to the match and you're like almost so tired already because you've been thinking about it all day long and stressing. I'm going to tell you that you can nutritionally adapt that to not be nervous like that. I know because it's happened to me, it's happened to my athletes, where that change happens with the B12 and the folate, which you can get from beef liver, is the highest quantity of folate. You only need a little bit, you don't need too much. So B12 folate, but mostly the B12 will make the myelin sheaths around your nerves. So that's another reason I think that Dr. Baker, Sean, is so
I love it.
cool. The cucumber, because it's like, he's like nutritionally supported.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love it, and just reiterating the amount of nutrients found in red meat, and I wanna talk about the carnitine and carnosine too, because a lot of our young girls complain about always being sore or they don't have fast recovery, and that's another thing I notice with having red meat every single day. Haven't been sore, and my workouts go longer. I can do more reps even though I didn't program them. I'm just like, wow, I like got it in me. I got it in the tank. And then the next day I'm not like wobbling. Like I feel great. Like the recovery is just quick. So let's talk about what carnosine and carnitine are doing in the red meat.
Yeah, so carnitine is necessary to move fat for fuel. So when you combine high protein with the red meat and the high fat, this is, I believe, one of the reasons I'm able to so efficiently myself use steak an hour before I run to fuel myself. And it's because one, I'm adapted, so it's easily digested. People think meat rots in your stomach, but it couldn't be far from the truth.
Your
Uh,
digestion actually improves and becomes like the best it's been.
and meat actually doesn't make it to your lower intestines where
Right.
you feel the
You actually
bloating.
absorb it. You
Yeah,
use
you
the
absorb it in your
nutrients.
upper, right, your stomach and your upper intestines. So,
Yep. That's
really,
another benefit I noticed.
yes,
Yeah.
no bloating, no gas. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, People, for some reason, always say, "Oh my gosh, but how are you pooping without fiber, without
Yeah,
all
how's your digestion? I'm like, "It's the best it's
the
been, like,
but
no bloating, nothing."
yeah, and the fat does help with those bowel movements as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yep.
yeah, and you're getting all the amino acids you need for proper digestion, all that stuff. So the
Yep.
carnitine moves fat for fuel. So you're able to actually even better utilize that fat for your competition by having the L-carnitine in the steak. Okay, and then carnosine. It used to be they say it buffers lactic acid, but really we found that lactic acid is not what causes fatigue. It's just a byproduct of the mechanism to make more energy when your ATP runs out. So the lactic acid is not the enemy. And they're not really sure what it is. One of my friends who's super smart and all this stuff thinks it's maybe the calcium ions, but nobody actually really knows yet which chemical process is causing that fatigue. They just know that lactic acid rises in conjunction with that process in order to create a fuel to keep you going. So the carnitine buffers fatigue, we'll just say. So a lot of people take beta alanine, which is the precursor to carnitine. So they go hand in hand. So instead of taking, you can take beta alanine as well. They work really well together. But the carnitine in the red meat gives you a lasting energy. And not only that, but you're going to have more fatigue. That lactic acid goes up, meaning your fatigue is going up, right? It's not the lactic acid's fault, but the fatigue is going up. We know that because the lactic acid's going up to try to compensate. It goes up when you consume more carbohydrates. That is something that a lot of people don't know, but if you really dive into the research, that's what's happening. The more carbohydrates consumed, the more lactic acid is going up, and it's because that fatigue is happening faster. So that's a little bit about carnitine and carnosine. Of course, it's got creatine as well. I'm going to say I'm probably one of the few people you talk to these days that is not a fan of giving female athletes creatine. I think it's fine for certain men, but it really has an impact on IGF-1, which is a growth hormone, which can produce testosterone, which is sometimes good for athletic performance, but in women who are already sub or girls who are already sub 15% body fat, I've found that it starts to create an irregular menstrual cycle. So I'm actually not a fan of supplementing creatine, but I am definitely a fan of natural creatine in the red meat because it's perfectly packaged with all those other amino acids that it's meant to be with.
I just love red meat and that we're hammering home how important it is, and it's just so fascinating because it's something that is so vilified, and people have said things like, "Oh, it rots in your stomach. Oh, it causes colon cancer." And we grew up with this messaging, and I can't help but ask, why were they saying this? And now there's like all these doctors online speaking out and being like, no, there's actually so many anti-cancer benefits and benefits for athletic performance, benefits for people who suffer IBS or who have SIBO. And you hear all these stories from people saying, wait a minute, like this actually cured this. And it's not just like a couple people saying it. You go online and read the comments, and it's hundreds of thousands of people, which is kind of what did it for me when I was in that in between phase and like doing the research. I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't even know if I really need a study for this, like, because there are so many stories, and I'm just going to self experiment. And if I have everything cured in several months, then it worked. And it did. And I know I already listed some of the benefits earlier, but just better digestion, better sleep.
Sustainable throughout your life. It's not just a short-term diet type thing,
Yeah,
but
it's a lifestyle
always
because you feel so good,
is
and
not
you just want to
above.
you just want to share it too because you just feel so great. And it's yeah, I didn't know how inflamed I was and how bad I felt until this change happened. I thought I was healthy before. I thought I was like quote unquote clean eating and like doing all the things.
Very
But when you
balance.
come over to this side of the high protein, high fat, then you're like, whoa, I actually was not that healthy. And all the systems in my body are actually working how they should be working. And I've been slow to share it just because I'm not a nutritionist, and I had to try it for several months. And obviously it's still a little off the beaten path to say, oh, well, carbs and sugar are the problem, because everyone else in sports nutrition is saying, no, you need your carbs and sugar. And a lot of people who are talking to female athletes about it. But when it comes to that hormonal balance, sugar is the most inflammatory. A lot of carbs are the most inflammatory. And what happens the week before that period? Inflammation needs to be controlled. And what better
Absolutely.
way than to have healthy fats and good
And your
protein? So
system
it's
is
crazy.
breathing
People are
right.
saying to girls, have sugar. It's like anti-female health.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
Yeah,
And
it's crazy.
when people ask me, well, how much sugar? I keep my athletes to 15 grams of sugar or less per day. So maybe a good place to start, if you're curious, is to start adding up the grams of sugar. And yes, honey counts. Yes, dates count. All of that counts. Add up
Okay.
those grams of sugar and see where you are. And I bet you're probably going to be above 50. A lot of people are mostly, or I found, are 80 to 100 or over. Just one of those frappuccinos or whatever, that I mean, that's like 50 to 75 grams of sugar. It's ridiculous. That could be worse. Frappuccinos could not be worse for a young female girl's health. Or any of those coffees with the milk, the dairy, and sugar. Horrible for hormonal health. In fact, I had one client in her early 30s who just cut out those frappuccinos, and she struggled with kind of getting the rest of the protocol 100%, but I mean, she did increase red meat, but just cutting those out, her hormones balanced right away. So that makes what we eat makes a huge difference on our hormones. There's one other thing I want to talk about separate from eating, and that is screen time. Screen
Can
time,
I touch on before let's get to screen time, but I just want to ask, so for parents that are listening, they're like, okay, you guys are saying like drastically cut the carbs and sugar. Well, how the heck am I going to do that with a teenage girl? Like, isn't nutrition all about balance and doing what's sustainable? And I've said that in the past, but honestly, like what's sustainable is where your health is optimized, because once you feel so good and then your taste buds are adjusted, you almost like don't crave the other things. You just have to adapt and get past it. Is that what you would say to people?
yeah. So if you eat sugar for breakfast or simple carbohydrates or even oatmeal, a lot of people eat oatmeal, they think it's healthy because it's got a little bit of fiber in it, but it's really not. Um, if you eat that for breakfast, it's not your fault if you're craving that again a couple hours later, because your body again has the neurotransmitter dip. It's got the mood dip. It needs more to bring you back up. And then you become in this cycle like drugs where you need more to feel good. And eventually you're not going to get enough, or you're not eating, and then you feel depressed and anxiety, and then you don't, you wonder why. As a parent, we want our daughters to feel empowered, to feel strong. We want them to feel confident, beautiful, happy. That we want the same thing that we want for ourselves, we especially want for our daughters, and that is to have that joy continuously throughout the day and be content, be happy with their life. They're not going to be happy if they're having this constant anxiety. And so be a parent, step up to the plate, do your research, and try it. Try to say, oh my God, I can't eat meat for breakfast. People say, I go, really? You've never had bacon for breakfast? And they go, oh, I guess that is meat, that sort of thing. So, make it a norm, make it something that's special. You could make it special as far as, hey, look, you have this research that Olympians are using to win medals. Like you have this now because I heard it on Erica's podcast, and now I want you to do it. Maybe you have to meal prep as a parent at first, depending on their age. Of course, even my 18-year-old daughter, of course, she doesn't always do what she's supposed to do herself because she's busy doing other things. Her interests are elsewhere. So, but as a younger girl, and for my boys who are 9 and 10, I meal prep for them. I make sure that there's healthy snacks there for them. So I make sure that they know that there's no candy. I don't buy candy. Okay, we don't buy candy in the checkout. I don't buy the Takis or Dorito chips or whatever. I don't buy it. And then I normalize eating meat for breakfast, eating nuts for breakfast, eating berries for breakfast. My boys love berries. I normalize, eggs every few days. If you eat eggs every day, they have something that's inflammatory in them. So you don't want to, really eat eggs every day, but having that as a good source of choline. So you basically have to be a parent, do your research, and normalize this type of eating. Red meat, you can do a high protein lunch with vegetables. You can do, so if they're not eating, I would say like just try to keep packing their lunch and then consider supplementing the protein shakes. My daughter, I think I shared this with you on the last podcast, but I noticed at age 11, her hormones started changing and she started to become like Jekyll and Hyde. One minute she'd be fine, the next minute I'm going, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. What just happened? How did everything just change with her mood? And I would take her a protein shake. I would send her to her room with the protein. And if she came out before 8 minutes, she was not cured. Those hormones were still raging. And why? It's because it went with the blood sugar spike, okay? And the protein's stabilizing that. She came out after 8 minutes, she was a completely different person. She'd be like, I don't know why I was acting like that. Amazing. So what I learned is to keep on top of that. So I would pack a little protein shake in a baggie. She could just add the water into her shaker at school or something like that. There's not a lot of clean protein bars out there that don't have sugar or sucralose, artificial sweeteners. So I don't really approve of a lot of those. But just try to make an effort to make sure they're getting their protein in first, and or fats in the form of nuts, avocado, the healthy fats, not things like canola oil or I'm trying to think what else is the unhealthy fats. So they're, like kind of the French fries and things like that, potato chips with canola oil, that sort of thing. Kind of look for the ones with coconut oil or the healthier types of fats. If that's a good takeaway for your parents, maybe, that are listening.
I think that's fantastic. I think that what?
And watch their attention span soar.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Huge benefits of high fat, high protein for helping with ADHD. Lots of research on that front. And I think that's really great advice for parents and for people listening who might still be skeptical. And you might be saying, oh, well, this sounds really restrictive. Well, it's restrictive for your overall health if you're constantly addicted to sugar and carbohydrates and you have so many ups and downs. And honestly, it's liberating when you do find really vibrant health with a high fat, high protein diet. There's nothing restrictive about it when you do feel so good in your life and in your hormones and in your sport performance. And I think this is going to really have people leaning in and just asking a lot of questions. But I'm happy to.
I like that you said that it's not restrictive
Not at
because
all. Like people are
what
like,
is
"Oh, you only
restrictive is
eat meat."
being
I'm
sick.
like, "Yep."
Yeah,
Yeah,
being sick is restrictive,
it
and
is.
nobody wants to be sick. Nobody wants their children sick. I just had a client the other day. I met with that. She has PCOS. She's 32, and she is trying to have kids and can't have kids. So
Yeah.
she, let me in on that she had an eating disorder. I have several clients who have had eating disorders in college. So I'm outside in Hawaii, so we got bugs and birds and all kinds of nice wildlife. But she let me know that, a lot of my clients have had eating disorders in college. And what I've found, Erica, is that, oh my gosh, the high protein, high fat diet has cured them of their psychological attachments to food. How
I've
does that
seen
happen
research
when
on that.
you think it's
Yep.
restrictive? Like, or when you from an outside point of view, you would think it's restrictive. But what happens is something like this particular girl the other day. They have a genetic disposition to getting PCOS or hormone imbalance or overweight. It's exacerbated by the unfortunate nutrition information out there and what they're serving in schools and now with screens, which we'll get to. It's exacerbated. So they become frustrated because they hit puberty, they gain weight, they can't get it off no matter how much exercise they do. So then they start obsessing over more exercise. They start obsessed and they have an eating disorder where they overexercise. They get bulimia. They get anorexia because they're trying to desperately keep that weight off. They count calories, not nutrient density, but calories. And maybe they at first lose some weight that way, but by the time they get to age 20, it's not working anymore because they've disrupted their thyroid so much. And then they have thyroid issues. And if they even look at a 1P, they gain weight. And they're like, what happened? I used to be able to work out a lot and now I can't. I can't eat anything or else I gain weight. And it's because this whole system has been thrown out of whack because they're eating so many carbohydrates, okay, from the beginning. So basically what happens is when I put them on this eating program with this high protein, high fat, they don't have those cravings anymore. And they don't feel that guilt of having to like, oh my gosh, I restricted my calories. Now I really, really want this donut, but I had it, so I feel guilty. And now I'm going to make myself throw up. Like, this is horrible. And it makes me so sad for these girls because it's so unnecessary. When you have the proper balance of neurotransmitters, you don't have those cravings. You just have happy energy. You have low inflammation, so your brain's not foggy. You don't feel that distress and that anxiety. And the reason why we're talking about this today is because it made me feel fantastic and made me a world champion, but mostly it made me feel fantastic. And I get to help people make babies and I get to help them I get texts like, I've never felt better in my life. And that's why we're sharing it, because you had that same experience and we really want other people to have this experience. I have one thing, some people will say, okay, what about this athlete over here who's a national champion and all they do is eat McDonald's and donuts, right? Okay, that's going to come up.
Right.
Well, what happens is that some people are born with longer telomeres than others. And the telomeres get shorter as your cells replicate, as you kill old cells and make new ones. So someone who smokes cigarettes shortens their telomeres faster than someone who does, say, high intensity exercise like sprinting, who can actually lengthen their telomeres. Telomeres are markers for biological aging. So the longer your telomeres are, basically the better your longevity is. So sometimes people are born with these really long telomeres and they can get away with it until maybe their 20s or their 30s. And then they have a host of chronic disease and health problems. So just because so-and-so is a national champion and they're getting away with that junk food doesn't mean that internally they're not disrupting their whole body. So athletic performance wise, they just have different genetics and longer telomeres that enable them to get to that athletic performance. It doesn't mean that it's what's optimal for them. And we know that chronic disease is getting worse and children are more obese than ever. These are facts. And that means there's a problem wrong with the system. There's a problem with the food pyramid. There's a
And the
problem with
autoimmunity.
Yes, absolutely. Autoimmunity. I have an Olympian who, when I met her 4 or 5 years ago, she couldn't get out of bed because she went to the Rio Olympics, couldn't get out of bed or make a comeback because she was stuck with an autoimmune disease and the Western medicine couldn't address the root cause. I addressed the root cause. We changed her diet and supplements. And, she set the American record. She not only came back for another Olympics, but she set the American record. So, yeah, again, like that brings me joy. And so that's why I'm here talking to your listeners today. You can believe me or not, it's okay. Just do your own research, experiment yourself. If you think I'm just wacky and crazy, that's totally fine too. It doesn't matter to me because I get to help make another baby in the next couple of months with this client I met this week. And I have a master's athlete who broke 7 world records so far this year. She's 60 years old. She was plant-based for 7 years, just started eating meat again this year. 7 world records at age 60. Okay, so I'm just fine with what I believe and how I help others, whether somebody believes me or not.
Right, and you're just going to keep doing what you're doing. We're just going to just keep eating our red meat over here. But I am going to include a lot of research and podcasts for further resources. And I just want to come back to the eating disorder discussion. So there's a lot more research coming out about how anorexia is going into remission in certain patients, and they're completely healed. And there definitely is something to adding that fat to really help with their brain function, because a lot of the root of these eating disorders comes from OCD, and that fat is really going to help really nourish the brain and make sure that that can be mitigated. But I think it was Dr. Ken Berry who just did a whole podcast presentation and case study on anorexic patients who switched to a more ketogenic carnivore diet, and they became healed from it. And it's so interesting how messed up the medical system is, because they're just like, oh, well, you need like a feeding tube, and we just need to like give you sugar. And it's just so
Again,
backwards when you like
just
really like
behind.
look
They're
at
just
what's
behind in the research.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You kind
it's
of
so
knocked them
bad.
out because they're taught the wrong thing. They're
Yeah.
taught things that are really just archaic at this point. I mean, the whole carb loading
Oh, yeah.
thing is like that happened in the 1950s. And what happened was they actually restricted the runners' diets and training. So they didn't eat or train. They fasted for a week and didn't train. How many runners do you know fast and don't train for a week before their marathon, before they're shoveling candy into their mouth? Nobody does that.
Yeah.
Pasta parties for college track teams that I've seen, nobody's doing that. So they didn't even take the proper research correctly. But anyway, long story short, uh, it's it's kind of not their fault. It's not your listeners' fault for not knowing any of this or not being open to it if they're not. It's because it's they were taught the wrong thing, and it's coming from a place of profit over wanting people to be healthy. Unfortunately, is what I've seen firsthand. So,
Well,
we can talk
people
about
need
screens
to
for a minute. Are we ready to talk about screens yet?
yeah, I have to, let me see. I have to coach in about 20 minutes. So
Okay. Well, it's just real
um
quick about the screens.
yeah.
So one thing that also messes with insulin is disrupting the circadian rhythm. So I would love for your female athletes out there and the parents of female athletes to know that the more you can limit your children's screen time, the earlier, especially, but even as a teenager, if they can put their phone away, especially at night, after dinner, or at the dinner table, something like that, before the dinner table, and not have it for the rest of the night, definitely not be viewing that screen right before bed. All of this light from these screens and even the electromagnetic frequencies is disrupting the body's natural circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is more than just sleep. It's actually, we have circadian clock genes in our cells. So we need this to make vitamin D, which is a pre-hormone, which helps regulate your hormones. So it's all related. So I just really want to stress too, besides the high protein, high fat, please regulate the screens. The less screen time, the better. My daughter did not get a phone until she was age 17. And in her senior year, from 17 to 18, I did notice a difference in her mood with the screen, which was negatively affected. So I kind of wish I had waited till 18. And now my boys are 9 and 10. They don't have phones or iPads or anything like that. They do have an Xbox. We're doing an Xbox screen-free summer. So they watch a movie once or twice a week or something like that. And I've noticed their creativity's gone through the roof. They're athletic. ability has gone through the roof this summer. So it disrupts the circadian rhythm. And when you don't get that proper sleep, you can't heal your muscles for athletic performance because that's when we heal, is when we sleep. And you also get a spike in glucose. So people who wear continuous glucose monitors on their arms, their blood glucose stays spiked the whole next day if they have one night of disrupted sleep. So by having those phones during the day, you disrupt your circadian rhythms at night. You're not going to get the sleep. You're going to get the spike in the glucose, which we know leads to the insulin resistance, which leads to hormone problems as well. So I just really wanted to share that message.
It's an important message to share, and that sleep is just so crucial for our female athletes to really
Do you find
optimize.
you're sleeping better as well?
What?
Do you find you're sleeping better? I already know the
Oh,
answer, but
that's another thing. Yes.
tell us
So
about your sleep.
so I always suffered from insomnia for all of my 20s, and then when I switched to the high protein, high fat diet, I finally felt like I was getting that really deep sleep where I would wake up just so refreshed and just like beaming with energy. And like my husband always makes fun of me. I'm up at like 5 a.m., like so excited for the day now. And I used to not be like that. I would wake up with just these awful migraines, really low energy, severe brain fog too. And yeah, I've never slept better, and it's been incredible. And I also tape my mouth when I sleep so I can nose breathe properly and not breathe through my mouth. So that definitely has been a factor. But I will say, since adding more of that red meat, that deep sleep, that recovery and repair sleep has been amazing. Like I feel like I slept when I was like a baby, you know?
Yeah, there's nothing that compares to that feeling of
It's
waking up.
so good. Yeah.
You don't need the coffee right away. You don't
Yeah.
need you don't need to wake up. You're not in that fog for so long. You're just like, wow, what can I conquer today? And
Yeah.
a lot of that too has to do with that neurotransmitter reaction. So your dopamine is spiking. You're motivated to do things. You want to create new things, and the creation comes from the deep sleep as well. So the fat and the protein is more satisfying. So that's one of the other main things that help young girls is that they're more satisfied with smaller amounts of food. So the girls who are worried about like calories or intaking fat, I'm going to tell you that you're actually going to end up eating less portions and feel more satisfied and get the nutrients that your body needs to thrive. So that is a winning combination for both optimal health and for athletic performance.
Oh, so true. And this was so good. And I really can tell you care about our girls and you want them to be healthy and vibrant, not just for their sport, but for a lifetime. And they're just blasted with so much misinformation and just very confusing messaging. And I really implore everyone to check out Cynthia, follow up with her, please ask her questions, check out the research we're linking below, dive into these other podcasts, and just get curious. Don't just take everything you see as truth. Like really do the research, maybe even self experiment, because that's probably the best thing you can do, and you'll see what happens with your results. And just pay attention to everything: energy, focus, mood, creativity, your menstrual cycle, everything. Pay attention, your speed times, your muscular output, your levels of soreness. Like, pay attention to all of it and see what
You can
happens.
even journal that, maybe even write a journal, but
Yeah.
you'll know immediately how you
You'll
feel.
know. Yeah, you'll know. It's like, again, it's like that like Superman feeling. I mean, I at first I wasn't convinced about it, but then it happened. I'm like, okay, now I know what everyone in this community has been talking about.
Love that you feel that because that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
Right? Like one of my
We're on the
nicknames,
same page here.
yeah, one of my nicknames is Wonder Woman because I like
Oh,
to
I love
wear
it.
the red, white,
I
and
saw your
yellow.
Wonder Woman costume. You look exactly like her.
Well, but that's how I truly feel. Is like I feel like, and I want, like you said, I want everybody to feel that way. And
Yeah.
that whole mantra of eat a balanced diet and everyone's different. That's something I get told all the time. Well, everybody's body is different. Well, yeah, in a way, like,
Yeah.
Alaskan Inuits, probably need a higher fat diet than I do, but as a, Native American, ethnicity. However, neither of us need the sugar. That's the bottom line. And, time and again, no matter what, um, culture it is and what's going on, the chronic disease is increasing. And if my message today through your podcast reaches one person and helps them have a better life or saves their life or helps prevent chronic disease for them, that's why I'm here. So I'm just really want everybody to be happy and healthy and feel like Wonder Woman and Superwoman as well.
So, everyone, please follow up with Cynthia. Her social media is linked below. And we really hope you enjoyed the episode today. Definitely some things to think about, but we really hope you took something away, even if it was just one thing you want to start implementing to just have amazing health and performance. I will see you guys on next week's episode.